Hey, gang, how you doing? Welcome to another day, another warm-up, and good afternoon to you. It's not morning, but it is somewhere. So today, once again, part two of Kevin Smith. This man cannot be contained to just 1 hour and a half long episode. We got to just keep rolling. We didn't even touch on Marvel Knights and Daredevil. So, first of all, just want to make sure you guys are all doing well. You're safe, washing your hands, staying indoors as much as you possibly can until you have to go outside and do whatever it is you need to do. Stay safe, guys. Okay. So thanks for joining me again. I know we have people joining us from all over the world, all over the country. It's pretty exciting. It's pretty awesome, and I thank you. Hopefully, we're offering a nice distraction for you guys. It is a distraction, certainly for myself. Kevin is doing some strange stuff on screen. He's already in Skype, screwing around with things, and he's throwing me off. So a little bit of history, so that we don't have to recap this necessarily when I bring Kevin on. My old creative partner and friend Jimmy Palmiotti and I had started a company called Event Comics. We were launching our own independent books, and Ash was the primary book there, which was a superhero firefighter. And Jimmy's actually going to be on Friday, so we'll talk about that as well in the steps that led up to Marvel Knights. But somewhere in the middle of that, Event started publishing in 1993, and right around 1997, we started discussions with Marvel to come on over and sort of bring the Event company and formula, whatever it was that we were doing, to Marvel to do a small number of books, which we eventually called Marvel Knights. Marvel Knights launched in September of 1998, and it was a pretty down time for the comics industry. But somehow or other, Jimmy and I were able to twist one guy's arm, who was sort of the linchpin in really what I think was our success and eventually Marvel's success with the line, and that was Kevin Smith, the indie darling, great filmmaker, great screenwriter, and an absolutely wonderful person. So I'm going to bring Kevin on in a second. I want you guys to know, if you have any questions, there were questions that were submitted via Twitter and via Facebook. I always put out a message on Twitter and Facebook the day before I do one of these streams. Those folks that chime in with those questions get first dibs at my guests. So those questions have first dibs at Kevin. But if you have any questions, please ask them on the stream. I can't see it, but the guys at Marvel are looking at it, and they will pick out questions that they know the questions that I'm going to ask. So they'll pick out questions if they're just because your question is picked, by the way, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be answered, because it might mean that there's a duplicate question that's already ahead of you. So if it's a unique question, you might stand a chance of getting in as well. But always remember, Twitter and Facebook, I'm going to post it ahead of time and for our guests, and you can jump in there and ask those questions, and there's a good chance that it will be on screen, if that sort of thing matters to you. If not, just kick back, listen to the interview. Kevin likes to talk a lot, so I'm squeezing my words in now because I know I won't have a chance later. And I'm going to encourage Kevin, who's on sort of backstage right now, to not refer to Jimmy and I sort of in the third person, but say, "Hey, you, Joe," because I don't know why he does that. It's really weird. Well, Jimmy, he can, because Jimmy's not here yet. But with me, it's really weird when he says, "Joe did this," and I'm standing right there, sort of digitally or string. I don't know what you call it. Anyway, let's bring him on. You guys, heard plenty from him about everything that happened before Marvel Knights last episode. If you didn't see it, I encourage you to go back and watch it after you're done watching this one, and away we go. So let's see if I can get this right here. Oh, it worked. Kevin, it worked. How are you, man?
For you, man. Here's why I say Joe or Jimmy, because people watching are listening to a narrative. Okay. So I'm talking to them, not so much you. I talk to you all the time on this show.
But it's weird because when you talk to me, you say Joe too. It's really odd. I don't know why.
In person, I'm always like, the thing about Joe is that Joe and Joe is sitting right there.
But I'm sitting there thinking, who are you talking?
How am I on time and Jimmy's not here?
Jimmy's
I'm
actually
always late.
I know. No, Jimmy was supposed to be on today, but he graciously said, give Kevin Wednesday, and Jimmy's got Friday. He's got a lot of stuff to promote too. He's doing a crowdfunding thing right now on Kickstarter called Pop Kills or Pop Kill. I'm not sure if it's, but anyway. So if you're a fan of Jimmy and Dave Johnson, go check it out. It's an awesome book. So let's talk about Marvel Knights, my friend. Let's talk about the beginning there. I'm gonna put up a little Guardian Devil cover there. So So, we had become, dear friends long before this had happened. Jimmy and I knew of your love for two characters, or three characters actually. It was Daredevil, Batman, and Green Arrow. We would talk extensively. Well, not so much Green Arrow because I don't really know a lot about that character, but I have the same affection for those top two as well. And it was always, we were doing our own independent books, and you were doing your movies, and the idea of writing any one of those characters was such a fantasy, no less gaining control over those characters to do something. So when the opportunity came to do Daredevil, we reached out to you, and you said no. So
No, it's the first
like,
thing
that's
I
right. No,
said
you're
was,
right. You're right.
"Oh
Right. Right.
God, yes,
Right.
absolutely. Oh my, thank you." And
That's
so
right.
I was in, and then
By the way,
I previously
when you
mentioned,
tell hold on, when you tell this story, there were a lot of expletives by Jimmy, so we're going to have to be careful about how we describe this. So go ahead.
it was like basically I kind of chickened out in as much as we got closer to it, and I was telling them like, they kept calling Jimmy and Joe, going like, "Hey, where's the script? We got to get going. Marvel Knights is starting. Priest already turned in his Black Panther script. Jay Lee's already drawing." Like, and Nancy, Joe's Nancy, was also cracking the whip about like, "Where's a script?" I said, "You know what? I'm just going to tell them that I can't do this." So I was speaking to Joe, and I was like, "You know what, Joe? The more I think about it, I don't think I can handle this. Stepping in Frank Miller's shoes, like, what am I, crazy? Like, as much as I love Daredevil, I'm probably not your guy." And Joe was so incredibly sweet and supportive. He was like, "Oh, you know what? If you're not feeling it creatively, I understand. That's a bummer, but I understand." And I was like, "All right, man, thanks." And hung up, and I felt good because I was like, "All right, well, that's one less thing to worry about, and I'm off the hook." Then 10 minutes later, Jimmy calls me up, and I realized that Joe was the good cop and Jimmy was the bad cop. And Jimmy just berated me for being so chicken. He's just like, "Not only did you let us down, you let Joe down. He had a lot of faith in you. But the reason you're letting us down isn't even good enough. Like, you don't think you're as good as Frank Miller? Nobody's as good as Frank Miller, man. Somebody's still got to write these comic books. Boy, you're a real disappointment, Kev." Like, he went at me, and finally in the phone call, I was like, "Well, I mean, if you think I could do it, like, I'll totally do it. Like, let me think about it, man. I'm sorry." And I was watching a movie called God Told Me To, which was a Roger Corman movie, if I remember correctly. And in that, it has a storyline about like a guy who figures he's a messianic character. So I instantly call back Jimmy and Joe and go, "Ooh, here's the story. Daredevil is given a baby, and the baby is the Antichrist, and he's got to look out for the baby." And they were like, "All right, now you're thinking. Let's go." And so that's how the story began. Like, they asked me. At first, I was like, "Yeah," and then I didn't get around to it. And then I was like, "You know what? This is way too big for me." And then they good cop, bad cop me. And that very night, the same night of the good cop, bad cop, the Guardian Devil storyline was born, and it has everything to do with Joe being nice about letting me go, Jimmy not being nice about, me letting them down, and me sitting there watching that Roger Corman movie. All three of those things suddenly birthed Guardian Devil. And my first script was not a script. I'd never written a superhero script before. I'd written a Clerks script for the comic books that we had done at Oni, but I'd never, like, we did a Jay and Silent Bob one shot, but I'd never written a comic, like a superhero comic book script, let alone a Marvel script. So Joe was like, "Just write down the outline for the first few issues." And so the episode 1 or issue 1, the outline was very thick, comprehensive, or at least page and a half. The other ones were like a paragraph or something like that. But he had a page to go on for issue 1. Which is vastly different from a movie script. Comic book script, a movie script, you're just breaking down interior, exterior, and then the scene happens. Comic book script, it's page 1 of then 22, but say now 20. So you've got to describe not just page 1, panel 2, panel 3, however many panels you have on that page. You have to write all that stuff out. I would eventually do that sort of thing, but for my very first Marvel script, it was total Marvel method, almost like, and Joe made me feel better about that. He goes, this is how Stan and Jack did it. Stan would tell Jack the story he wanted to tell. Jack went and drew whatever he wanted. Stan came back and put all the words on top of it. So from that one page that I'd given Jimmy and Joe started getting me back pages. And you got to remember, we didn't have the internet. So he wasn't like, I emailed you a page. Like, he would have to take a large comic book board and then copy it, shrink it down, and then fax it to me if that was the way to do it. And then eventually we kind of started going digital. So as I saw issue 1 unfold, it looked like nothing that was in my head because I hadn't given it much thought beyond like that one page I'd written. It was beautiful. It looked like a comic book, and I felt like a fraud because I was like, I didn't write this. And Joe's like, it's going to be your words. And that is why if you read up issues 1, 2, probably up to about issue 4 of Guardian Devil, they are packed with dialogue because I was like, that's the only thing I'm bringing to this, man. Like, Joe directed this book. I better bring some words. And I think, I'm not bragging, but I think the issue 1 may be one of the most verbose Marvel comics ever created, with balloons and words everywhere. So after I saw the first issue, I was like, oh my Lord. And he goes, now write the dialogue to it. So our very first issue, my very first Marvel comic, was done traditional Marvel method.
Yeah, you didn't even know it.
I didn't at all. And then by issue 2 or 3, I started writing like a movie script. Joe had explained to me, like, you got to break down the page and the panels. But he was always very like, look, I got you covered, so just make sure you got all the dialogue handled. Later in life, when I would work with artists that I wasn't as familiar with as Joe, my comic book scripts got much thicker because then I had to explain every intent I had in my head, every camera angle. Like, whereas with Joe, we started with me going, I think it'll be a story like this. Then Joe handing me back a fully directed comic book where I was like, oh, this is what it looks like. All right, this is what we're doing. And then me working toward that. And so by issue 3, I think I was writing full script. But even then, Joe was like, with the words, bro, dial the words back. So many words. He had beautiful pictures that he had to cover with giant word balloons, and as an artist, he was being accommodating because, like, here I was coming over to comics. But as an artist, I mean, did it burn you inside? Were you like, where am I supposed to put my drawings with all these words?
No, actually, the truth of the matter was that I was more concerned about you, and I don't mean that in the trite way. I mean in the sense of, like, this is your entree to comics. There's so much attention on this, so I was trying to sort of guide you through the process. I want to back up a little bit because we mentioned a couple of names, and I want to back up to that story with Jimmy because the other side of it is me being in the room. So first of all, you mentioned Nancy DeKezian, who was our managing editor, our accountant, our proofreader. She did everything for the company, along with Kelly Lammy, who was her assistant, and they just kicked butt always from Marvel Knights.
They ran the show, and basically,
Absolutely.
even though Joe and Jimmy were like, they worked, and don't get me wrong, and they'd come from Event Comics and stuff, and whenever somebody wrote about the Marvel Knights line, it was Jimmy and Joe, Joe and Jimmy, Jimmy and Joe.
Yeah.
But the real spine of Marvel Knights was Nancy. Nancy, like, ran it insanely well, knowing there were schedules to keep because this was us playing with the big boys. Like, Marvel very rarely let IP go outside of their walls. Mm-hmm. And so she treated it so seriously because she was like, if we miss one deadline, if we are late on our books, like, this whole thing starts falling apart. She knew the importance.
Yeah. Well, also, it was culture shock for her because, and both her and Kelly, because both of them worked at Archie Comics for years and years and years. And those Archie artists, they're not like superhero guys. Those Archie artists get their work in like a machine, right? Because there's lots of people who can draw in that style. If you don't get the work in, okay, next we'll just hire somebody else. So it was really sort of running like a very, very old school publishing house. So this whole thing about comic auteurs, comic superhero auteurs being laid on a book, that just didn't exist in their sort of lexicon of like how stuff gets done. So the fact that anybody could be late was completely weird and infuriating for both Nancy and Kelly. But there are a lot of stories behind the scenes about Nancy and how she ran the business. I won't go into details, but one of them was we had someone who was very, very late on a book, and she literally threatened, if I don't get my pages, I will show up at your doorstep to get them from you. This person lived many states away. And one day there was a call, and there she was at his doorstep. She had driven all the way there to get pages. But a real funny story, again, coming from Archie, not the superhero world, and being a stickler for make sure everything's spelled right or whatever. I remember, we worked on the 13th floor of Marvel at one point, which is like sort of this little penthouse annex. And Nancy's office was on the opposite side of Jimmy and mine. And you could always tell when somebody was behind on a deadline because you'd hear some yelling and screaming coming from that office of self-frustration, right? It like couldn't get the stuff done. But I remember that same sort of angst, the sounds of angst coming from her office one day, and it wouldn't stop. And I finally walked in. I'm like, what is going on? And she's like, I cannot for the life of me find the right spelling or the spelling of this one word at all. Again, no internet, right? I'm like, what are you looking for? And she's like, adamantium. Adamantium. Like, how is that spelled? And I'm like, it's a made-up word. It's an absolute made-up word. You cannot find it spelled. And she had no idea, right? Because again, it's year one of Marvel Knights. So, but that story about me talking to you and then Jimmy talking to you, Jimmy and I were both in my apartment at that time, right? We were like pacing the floor, like, what are we going to do? Kevin's not delivering. Scripts are coming in. I'm supposed to be drawing, right? And I'm the toughest one because I'm not fast. And there's no script from you. And we're like, what are we gonna do? And she's like, just call him, right? I'm like, okay. And I call you and I give you that call. And then when I hang up, I'm like, and I'm losing my mind. Jimmy's like, give me that phone. And then he calls you up and it's just like expletive. Like, the hell's he doing? But it worked, And then the other part.
He challenged not so much my manhood, but my humanity. He was like, how could you do this to people? You said you were going to do something. You committed. And now you're not doing it. And I was sitting there as I was listening to him, and he was so volatile. I didn't want to point out. I was like, were you born yesterday? This world's full of people that never deliver. It was as if he'd never met someone in his life who let him down. Yeah. And he hit the right guy because I've got like one of those consciences that just kill. Yeah. So he was hitting me and, oh, Lord, I was like, all right, I'll do whatever I can. I'll make this work. This is going to be amazing. But thankfully he did. Like sometimes you need a push. Yep. I was definitely like, I like a little bit like, oh, man, what if I go out and stink? Like, and I'm going to stink compared to Frank Miller. I became obsessed with that notion. I was like, look, you like Daredevil because Frank Miller's run was religious, but his writing is religious. And, you're never going to be that. And then I talked myself out of it. Sometimes you need people to drag you over the threshold, man. Like you guys totally dragged me into one of the best jobs of my life, got me over my own fear. And you got to remember, we were releasing books almost like close to the schedule. We finished a book right before it was streeting.
Yeah. It was because the other part, after you said, okay, I'll do it, and you had the idea, there was still no script. So if you remember, I was calling and yeah, I'm on it, but you were knee deep in filming Dogma, right? And I know how all-encompassing working on a movie can be. I mean, you had a huge cast, you had a big story. There was a lot of stuff going on, but you were also filming in Pennsylvania. So Nancy and I got in a car and we went to the set and we're like, dude, where's the script? And then that's when you sort of hand it in the 1 page thing. I'm like, good enough, because by that point, I'm thinking, I got to write this story. I have no story. And, we're getting artwork in already from some of the other books, and I haven't even started because there's no script. So, as you were saying, that first script came in, and so I'm already behind the 8 ball. I'm probably literally about 2 months, maybe 3 months behind the 8 ball, and I'm not the fastest artist. So we were working in those Marvel offices. We were there 7 days a week, probably till 2 or 3 in the morning every night, just cranking out those pages. At least I was cranking out those pages to try to catch up. Eventually,
when you say cranking out,
right?
Like in my head, as a longtime comic book reader, I've sometimes you're hitting deadlines, sometimes you're not hitting deadlines. So not every book is drawn, with utter aplomb. Some books feel like rushed.
Yeah.
This stuff never felt rushed, even though he was rushing. You were looking at, still, he threw up a cover before. The 8 covers of Guardian Devil are iconic Marvel covers, things that Joe and Jimmy whipped up to kind of sum up the inside of the book. So even though I made them late, in that Joe should have had this much time to do issue 1. Joe had this much time, but made the book look like he had this much time, like he'd been doing it for 2 years and waiting for his shot. And on some level, that's probably true. He'd done work for DC. He was there standing on his own with his own creator-owned character. And suddenly, Marvel was his childhood, and he was allowed to step up to the plate. Like that, what was that movie with Mark Wahlberg where he's a bartender and they make him a Philadelphia Eagle? It's like that.
Rudy? Is that Rudy?
Invincible.
Invincible. Sorry, yeah, Rudy's the other. Right.
It's like that. It was like there was a guy who was ready his entire life for Marvel to be like, okay. So even though my script coming in late hurt his ability to do the best job he possibly could if he was anyone else, even though I handed in the script late, he still turned in this insanely stellar work that still stands head and shoulders above lots of other work in the Hallmark in the pantheon of drawn, illustrated comic books. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. And he was developing it from behind the 8 ball. And again, not developing issue 1 from a 22, 40-page script, from a 1-pager. So the fact that it looks as great as it does had everything to do with you being this sharp and honed tool who knew opportunity when it came your way. You did understand the importance. I'm not going to name names, but there are other people that took Marvel characters out of Marvel and were in charge of them and turned in books nobody really talks about today. You were given stewardship of some books, and you treated it as if I drop the ball, I lose my life. You played that game like you were saving the universe, and that's why those books are so wonderful, particularly why Guardian Devil is. It's why it looks as stunning as it did. You made up for the deficit of a writer who was kind of dragged into the process and then came alive once he saw what it could be. Your artistry made that book what it was on so many levels. It inspired me as the writer to be like, now we got to step it up. Because when we started that series, there was barely a storyline. And it was literally Daredevil is dealing with the Antichrist. And there are demons and angels. And there's a guy. And he's got demon henchmen and stuff like that. And we were one of, I can't say for certain. I don't know how they did it back in the days of the bullpen. If they were ever working on a story and then reading the letters section and then deciding to change a story based on reader feedback. But we did that. We had the internet at our disposal. And once issues 1 and 2 were out and people were reacting to them, we were able to editorialize mid-run. So Mysterio, who is our big bad, at the end of the series, you don't realize that until issue 7, issue 8, maybe 6, 7, 8. I think 6 is cover of 6 maybe is where he's trapped in the helmet. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think
but 6, 7 is where we reveal the big bad as Mysterio. And Mysterio at this point is not the Mysterio who was just in a Spider-Man movie and the whole world knows who he is. He was old Mysterio that nobody used and kind of jokey character and definitely always part of the Sinister Six. But like this was a guy that was not like, he wasn't a popular Marvel villain. He was to me because I loved his look my entire life. He looked amazing. So we're reacting to reader reactions. And one of the first reader reactions that I saw was people going like, this is going to be supernatural? Oh man, like one of the things I like about Daredevil is he's down to earth. He's fighting in the streets. He's not fighting ghosts and magicians. He works for the regular guy. Like he fights normal people. And suddenly I got scared and I told Joe, I was like, we can't make this the devil. Like that's nuts. Like, you know, it's got to be somebody messing with his life. I was like, you know, what about this? One of my favorite stories is Craven's Last Hunt, Fearful Symmetry, the Spider-Man story. I think it was J.M. DeMatteis wrote it, where Craven comes to New York and does something that he's never done before. He practically kills Peter, buries him alive under a gravestone, and then assumes the identity of Spider-Man and goes out as Spider-Man for, you know, a period of time. Meanwhile, Peter has to literally dig himself out of a grave to come back to life, so to speak. But at the end of the story, spoilers, if you've never read it, it's a great story, about to spoil it. 1, 2, 3. At the end of the story, one of the most memorable moments in about to deliver justice, and Craven delivers his own justice because he's this broken individual who realizes he could never be as great as the man that he hunted. And right. It's an incredibly compelling story. So I said to Joe, what if we did something like Craven's Last Hunt, man? Like where essentially, like at the end, we got a big bad who is on his way out. And so all of this elaborate, like let's blow the doors off and just do this incredible elaborate scheme that Daredevil is never used to dealing with on his level. Other characters, Spider-Man is used to dealing with Mysterio, creating, you know, a fake reality. For Daredevil, this would come out of left field, particularly because it was a Spider-Man villain. It wasn't one of Daredevil's villains. So Joe was like, let me ask upstairs, because we had our Marvel Knights titles, or Joe and Jimmy had the Marvel Knights titles, but other characters in the Marvel Universe we weren't necessarily given access to. We could play with Kingpin because he had become a big feature in the Daredevil universe, but Kingpin technically a Spider-Man villain, and we wanted to borrow another Spider-Man villain, which was Mysterio. So who was the editor at that point? Was it Jemis?
Bob Harris was the editor-in-chief. Yeah, at the time.
Bob Harris was the editor-in-chief. He allowed us, and he could have been like, no, like you're not touching Spider-Man IP, but he was like, yeah, okay, go ahead. And Joe probably made like an elaborate and very eloquent plea for the character. I'm sure it wasn't that simple. But once we had Mysterio, then we started reverse engineering Guardian Devil while we were in the middle of making Guardian Devil. It was one of the most nimble exercises of creativity I've ever been involved with in my life. And more importantly, one of the most successful, because you can switch horses midstream and be nimble in case things fall apart. Doesn't necessarily mean the end product is going to turn out great. You know what I'm saying? Like I've been involved with some movies where we got hit by outside influences, and you try the best you can to like dam the leaks, but at the end of the day, it's a creaky craft. You would never know reading Guardian Devil that it came together as haphazardly as it did, but it's a testimony to thinking on one's feet and also like interacting with the audience. We used the audience, not used them, but they told us what they liked and what they didn't like. Right. And then we leaned into that and changed the story accordingly, not quite in real time because we're talking about being months out from a book, but in real enough time for 1999, 2000.
Yeah. I mean, the crazy thing is that when I'm drawing that book, I have no idea who Maccabees, the bad guy, actually is. I really don't. You know, it was almost like, you know, when an actor works on a television show and they really don't know what the next few episodes, where their character's going for the next few episodes. They could be dead by the time the season's over. They have no clue because the showrunners sort of want that freshness of reaction when the actors get into it. But I had no clue where you were going with it. I knew that it was starting to feel supernatural and Okay. And to be honest with you, the way that you worked on this is the way that like when I write something, I can't do that. I have to know my ending. But I think we were all so new to this, and also new to a new audience, right? Because Marvel readers were expecting a certain thing, and not having been, yeah, I read Marvel comics, but not having been ingrained in editorial, that was an educational process to get to know exactly what the audience wanted and what the audience didn't want. So it was a cool thing to go through. It was terrifying at the same time because even Mysterio was just kind of like, whoa, this is gonna be a curveball when it when it appears in the pages. But the fans loved it at that point, you know. And by the way, he was a blast to draw. But I want to go back to that first that we were talking about, that first script, because after I drawn that entire issue, now you were saying I sent it to you for dialogue, and your dialogue came back, and I looked at it, and I'm like, this is really good stuff, but it's a lot of stuff, and having worked with writers that come from other mediums, the first thing they learn or even myself when I started writing books for Event along with Jimmy, was how many words, how few words actually fill up a word balloon. And suddenly you realize that, what you think is like two sentences you can fit in one word balloon is making this massive word balloon. And what happens is when you get back the art, it's not even so much the fact that it blocks the art. It's the fact that, word balloons are traditionally white. So when you have that big glob of white there, it really stands out. When you have a lot of big globs of white, suddenly that's all you see. So I remember sending the script back to you very, very tepidly, and there was a lot of red lines on it, right? Where I was crossing stuff out because I'm like, Kevin, you could get to say what you're saying here with if we could take out this, and that. And you're like, no way, man, nobody touches my words. Those go in, they're going in. And I'm going, because I'm like, Kevin, okay. I said, look, it's all going in, but I'm going to tell you right now, when that book comes out, you're going to say, wow, that's a lot of white on the page. And when the book came out, the first thing you said to me was, there's a lot of white on that page. But you learned the craft. And you said, I think by issue 5, you were fully baked and kicking butt. I also think issue 5 is where Karen meets her tragic demise, if I'm not mistaken. It might be somewhere in there. But boy, you were knocking them out of the park at that point. And also right around issue 5 is where I started to speed wobble, where I couldn't keep up anymore with the schedule. My mom was also, dying at that time too. So it was a really crazy time because, there was a lot of stuff going on.
Did we miss a month or 2 months? No, we missed 1 month or something.
I think so. Yes, somewhere in there, it was just impossible for me to make up the time. Because also, when I say I was cranking it out, I don't mean that I'm like hacking these pages out. I'm cranking. I mean, I'm just, I wish I could be as fast as some other artists, but it takes me a lot of time to construct my pages, to think through my pages, and at least put out something that I'm proud of. But listen, it was fun. It was trial by fire. It was a great time. But yeah, I remember those pages coming with the dialogue. It was like, whoa, dude. But the other thing about this is that I hear from a lot of people who've read the book who say, for that, that limited run, right? It's not like we did 24 issues or 3 or 4 years of this book. There's a lot of story condensed into those few issues. I mean, that first issue alone, I mean, yeah, it was wordy, but man, we were giving people, I think, their money's worth. There's a lot of story there. There's a lot of setup, and you touched on so many aspects of the Marvel universe, right? I mean, clearly, Mysterio was something you wanted to touch on. I mean, you Sister Maggie, right? Sister Maggie it's the lingering question that Frank Miller left out there right after Born Again. And I know you and I talked about it a lot, and you're like, I'm going to answer that question. Tell us a little bit about, how you worked your way into the Sister Maggie aspect of the story.
I think. Number one, I was a fan. I was certainly not approaching it as like, this is a job. And what are these characters? Yeah, I can write this story.
I want to stop you for 1 second, Kevin. I just want to stop because one of the things that I know that you also found attractive about Daredevil is that he's one of the few characters that wears his religion on his sleeve, right? And I know that whole Christian aspect Catholic aspect of Matt was something that really attracted you too. So okay, sorry, just wanted to.
They did. Frank had woven in Catholicism into the character, it hinted that this Sister Maggie character had a familial connection to Matt, like in the Born Again storyline, which one of the greatest stories ever written and stuff. So the character was right up my alley. I was working on Dogma. I was already deep in the Catholic woods. And so suddenly I was like, oh, Daredevil, he's Catholic character. I can lean into it in that way as well. But you got to remember, like, historically, let's just place this where it happens historically in the Marvel history of Marvel. Marvel at this point, not necessarily known for writing. Bendis, this is pre Joss Whedon. This is when Marvel was known for the art. Like the books were selling based primarily on the artist. Writers were secondary, to say the least. Over at DC, it was different. It was, you had Alan Moore, Neil Gaiman, and Grant Morrison. So writers were selling books, the writing names more so than the artist names. So when we jumped on to Daredevil, thank God Joe had a rock star artist name, because we were about to introduce them to a book that Marvel fans hadn't really seen in a while. Not taking anything away from the X-Men, Chris Claremont was always writing a very detailed and deep book that was like an ongoing soap opera, almost impenetrable if you hadn't been reading that book for a while. But we were trying to ape a style that hadn't been in comics for a minute. Like, we loved Born Again and Frank's Daredevil stuff, and that had been long gone. It's not like, people still remembered it fondly, I guess, as classics, but the modern audience, that wasn't their parlance. In fact, Daredevil, the character, fell out of the top 100 sales. Like, they had kind of gone to that.
Daredevil was about to be canceled.
He went to the black suit. It got canceled. Remember, he went to the black suit. At one point, it was Mike Murdock. Matt Murdock got killed. He had a complete redesign and stuff. So when we jumped on and started playing with the character in a very literary sense, like it's unfair to say in this way, but like putting it in these very simple terms for the late 90s, I was writing a DC type comic for a Marvel audience. Joe was drawing a Marvel and DC comic for a Marvel audience. We were trying to tell a story that wasn't as simple as like, these guys hate these guys, and look, it's Wolverine. At that point, like, Wolverine was in every darn book. So we were trying to do something very different. And I remember, like, when the book went on sale, we were just like, all right, well, it's a #1 because they're renumbering it, so that will help sales. Maybe Kev, some people, because Kev will get a little more ink because he comes from movies and stuff. But we didn't know if the book would sell or if it would even be accepted by the current Marvel reader at that point. We were afraid they were going to be like, this is way too artsy. Would you just give us a book where everyone's beating the hell out of each other? Because in episode 1 or issue 1, not a whole lot happens. It's not like this guy shows up and fights this guy. Like, at best, Natasha Romanoff shows up and references how they used to, have a relationship in an old Ann Nocenti run of the book. It was, for me, it was like, it wasn't like a conscious, I'm going to introduce this audience to the Marvel books that I love, but that's what I was writing from. And particularly if you were writing Daredevil, you were referencing Frank Miller, you were referencing Ann Nocenti's stuff with like, what's her name? Typhoid Mary. And when Matt was just like, sleeping around like crazy and stuff. So you had a lot of rich history, and that allowed you to then get into the Catholicism of it all. Because other than Frank touching on it, I don't remember anybody really seizing upon it. So that's what I had going for me at that time. I'm like, my head was way deep in Catholicism because of Dogma. So I was like, I'll lean into this even more. It was very much like a mishmash of influences. Sister Maggie was an influence from Frank Miller and a tangential storyline that we were like, let's build on it. But when you look at that, at our entire run, it was kind of like, let me put in all the characters that I love from Marvel Comics and stuff. So we used Natasha right up front. Black Widow's in our book. Mercifully, she had a history with Matt Murdock, so we could reference that. So it wasn't only me going, I love Black Widow. It was like, man, Black Widow's pertinent to the history of Matt Murdock. the entire cast of Daredevil's family, of course, Foggy, Karen, so forth and so on. We got to use Doctor Strange. We got to use Mephisto. We got to use Spider-Man. We got to use Spider-Man because we got to use Mysterio, and that was another gift that we were given by big Marvel editorial. They not only allowed us to use Spider-Man, but he got to be on our cover as well, which is always a good thing for sale back in the day. So it was fan written and fan drawn by guys that were like, let's do the greatest hits from our favorite Marvel stories. And that's why I think any Marvel fan, when they pick it up, true Marvel fan, was like, oh my Lord, like this is so steeped in history. Joss would go on to do the same thing when he wrote the X-Men, probably a better version of it, but it was constantly referencing like the things that he grew up reading and loving. I remember reading his book when they did the Fastball, Fastball special for the first time. And I was like, like he knows it too, you know? So you had that going for you. The audience is going like, oh, they know the references that I know, because I don't know, we were, at least I think I was some of the first, like, I'm a fan of this stuff and now I'm a writer. You know what I'm saying? Like, certainly I gravitated toward it because I was a fan, not because I was like, I hope I could get paid in comics. It was because I was like, I just want to write these. This would be amazing.
Yeah. Well, you know, the thing is also, before you even wrote Word One or anybody saw the book, there was a lot of like, this Hollywood guy, he's going to screw it up, you know, and there was a lot of hate for the project before it ever came out. And then when it came out and they saw, oh, you're one of us, you get it, right? I mean, you were referencing a lot of the stuff, but it wasn't derivative, right? You were bringing your own sort of Kevin Smith take to it. Again, I think the stuff with Sister Maggie was so poignant, the way that you wrote those scenes between her and Matt, and you challenged me to try to keep up with you. And you mentioned Spider-Man, right? I mean, the Spider-Man issue was when you finished your story, you're like, I'm not done yet. I got to wrap it up. Can we get one more issue? And you worked Spider-Man in, and I thought it was perfect because, you know, Spider-Man is that sort of lighthearted character, youthful character who I mean, there's a lot of similarities between he and Matt, but they are absolutely opposite sides of the coin, right? Spider-Man, again, lighthearted, he's our everyman. Matt Murdock, to me, he is Shakespearean, right? And I think that's the beauty of what Frank worked into these stories, was you have a guy who is a lawyer by day, practices the law, and then by night practices vigilante law, which is completely the opposite of what he does during the day. He is incredibly religious, right? And yet at night he puts on a devil suit. Those kind of juxtapositions, the dark and the light, the good and the bad, or how mash into making this incredible character called Matt Murdock. And then you mix in the fact that he lost his sight as a child and he's honed his skills. Because that's the other thing we decided no radar sense, right? We decided this is like a ninja, right? This guy he could feel it, he could see it. You know, it's not a matter of like having this superpower. His senses have been,
circles coming out of his head.
His senses have been enhanced to a point where you as a reader could think it's just possibly plausible, right? The radar thing is another level of plausibility that you'd have to overcome. Not putting a slight onto any of that stuff, just the way that we chose on seeing Matt Murdock. The other thing is, I kind of stepped over you there, but before, when we were already making plans for Marvel Knights, suddenly we got word that Daredevil was on the verge of being canceled. And we talked to Marvel, and it was going to be canceled before we started Marvel Knights. So we talked to Marvel and said, can you guys, stretch it out a little bit so at least Daredevil ends properly and then it just goes to Marvel? Because if it was canceled and then Marvel Knights start, I think it would have sort of soured the waters a little bit, and they did. They stretched out and they got a full run of Daredevil. So the title has never been canceled. But that's how bad the comics industry was at that point. We all kind of had like the best seats on the Titanic at that point. And the idea to me that Daredevil could have been canceled is just ridiculous. But there were a lot of titles on the cusp there. But you came on and you did your thing, and here we are. There's been subsequently amazing runs after you're coming on, Kev. Good.
You're very sweet. The Spider-Man, let's hit Spider-Man real quick. The denouement issue, which is basically like we just put Matt through trauma.
Yeah.
So you need like the come down issue. What did it all mean, Charlie Brown? That kind of thing. Why did I go through this? And who better for him to speak to than Peter Parker, because Mysterio was Peter Parker's villain, so Spider-Man's villain. So the idea was to have this scene where Peter was going to counsel, or Spider-Man was going to counsel Daredevil because he'd been through this. Like he had also been mind warped by Mysterio, and what was it all? What did it all mean? And blah blah blah. And essentially, he just wanted to get to the one moment where, you know, Spider-Man, who is, as we all know, you know, youthful at heart forever, Peter Parker, even though at that period in comics he was grown up and married to Mary Jane, he was no longer a high school student, but Peter, always so pure of heart, has one of my favorite lines in the whole book where he just says, "You saved that little girl, Matt." Like that's what it's all about at the end of the day. So when I was writing the scene, I was like, all right, where would they talk? Where would these two talk? And I remember my first draft was Jean DeWolf's grave. Because remember there was the Death of Jean DeWolf book that Peter David had done.
Yeah.
And Joe was just like, yeah, that's good. I get it. He's going, but I think there's a better place for them to have a conversation.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, man. So let's see. We've talked about Sister Maggie. We've talked about Spider-Man, and I think we need to talk about Karen Page a little bit because you know Karen. Spoiler, guys. Karen met her demise here, and a little background in this story. You know, Karen hadn't been in the books for quite a while, and when she is, Marvel editorial at the time, the way it was viewed was that because of everything that she was put through during the Frank Miller run, right, and it was some crazy stuff from drug addiction to what she was doing to make a living and stuff, they sort of viewed her as a bit toxic in terms of like, you know, what do you do with this character, and you had an idea where, you know, Karen would eventually, you know, show up back in Matt's life. She has some very serious issues, health issues, you know, and well, I'll let you tell it, but it was all leading to an incredible, heroic yet sad demise of Karen.
Yeah, it was based on where Frank had taken the character. You know, she'd been in this Born Again storyline. Revealed to have been an IV drug user and had done some adult movies and stuff like that. She had fallen pretty darn far. And it's part of the beautiful aspects of that story because in her addiction and in her selfishness, she kicks off the chain of events that begins Born Again. She gives up Daredevil's identity. Sold him out. Yeah. Identity gets sold down the line, eventually ends up in the hands of the Kingpin. And then Kingpin dismantles Matt's life. So, you know, Matt has every right to not like ever want to deal with Karen Page again. But in the pages of Born Again, like he winds up saving her. It's one of the most beautiful moments in Marvel Comics history, if not comics history in general, and a gorgeous one-pager by Mazzucchelli of her crying, bawling like a broken person who knows that she like did everything wrong to this guy and him forgiving her. It is so Catholic. It's insane. So Karen's character then, you know, would be in and out of the books. And she, I think periodically, like, remember right before us, I think Carrie Nord was doing a Daredevil run where she was a DJ at night, like a Nightbird radio DJ or something. They were. Oh,
that's
you know,
right. Yeah. Well, you say DJ, right? You'd be like a radio DJ. Sorry.
Like a radio DJ.
Yeah.
Like it was tough to, you know, work around the Born Again storyline. So my thing was like, let's just lean into it. Like, let's use the Born Again storyline. And so at the top of our story, she has gone away. Even though when the run that ended right before us, Karen was in his life. So since we were jumping ahead or starting our own thing, we made it that Karen had left Matt. And so when Karen comes back into Matt's life, she reveals that she's HIV positive or that she has AIDS. So that was, for us, a consequence of the intravenous drug use. And then, if I remember correctly, we made it very like Maccabees, or really Mysterio, made it very, did she or didn't she? Because editorial was like, this is getting awfully close to uncomfortable territory. We're selling comic books here, guys. And so we made it a little more kind of oblique, whether or not Karen might have been tricked also by Mysterio as well. But we knew that Karen was going to give a reverse Born Again, essentially. Like Matt saves Karen's life in Born Again. There's a moment where she's sitting there trying desperately to fix in an alleyway. And the guy who is her pimp is about to shoot her, and she's just like, please, just one last hit. And then just as he's about to fire the gun, the billy club hits his hand, and it always makes me so emotional and stuff. So Matt saves Karen in Born Again. Doesn't have to give his life because he's Matt Murdock, but he almost gave his life, over the course of that storyline. In our storyline, we were going to do the reverse, where Karen's going to save Matt, but she unfortunately isn't gifted like Matt is, so she's going to save his life in a sacrifice. And to be fair, this was, I believe, before the term fridging became a thing. Remember, in the Green Lantern book, when they relaunched Green Lantern, they fridged his girlfriend was major damage or major disaster, killed his girlfriend, stuffed her in a refrigerator. And that gave Kyle Rayner, a motive. Like, now there's somebody I've lost. Right. And rightfully so, a lot of readers were like, you got to, kill a girl to get a guy to be a superhero and stuff. So we had done our storyline long before that, was an issue. And I didn't feel like we were like, let's throw Karen under the bus just to make this an interesting story. It was payback for Born Again. We were trying to swim in the same waters, and that to me was epic. So I was like, look, I'm not talented enough to do what Frank Miller did, but I got an idea. What if Karen gives her life saving Matt? And what if it's Bullseye? What if it's Bullseye? And I think Joe was the one who was like, it's Matt's Billy Club, because that made it even worse. The idea that the thing that kills her is the thing that he utilizes. If he doesn't throw that, if it doesn't get out of his control, maybe Bullseye doesn't get it and isn't able to throw it and ultimately kill Karen. So it was epic Shakespearean. We were doing just Sweeney Todd in that issue, where everything is tragic. Everything that can go wrong does go wrong on an epic level, and it's heartbreaking stuff. And when we did it, I don't think anyone saw it coming, because again, this wasn't a standard where people are like, let's just kill somebody. We kind of kept it quiet, and the cover, there were two different covers, and one was this really gorgeous stark cover of just red and white, if I remember, and some black, of Matt holding Karen's body. You couldn't tell it was Karen, but it was definitely a woman. So some people knew because there was an alternate cover, but the other cover didn't give away what was coming at all, if I remember correctly.
No, it didn't. And this is a big thank you to Marvel Editorial at the time, Bob Harris. I remember when we were talking about the death of Karen, and I said, look, we want to do this, and he gave it approval. And I said, we don't want to tell anybody, literally nobody in editorial. We just want to keep it to ourselves because it's so hard to surprise anybody in comics. And then I drew this alternate cover to the book that said, let's not solicit this. Let's just have it come out when the book comes out, and it'll be there. So it actually did catch a lot of people by surprise, I think, at the very, very end. It became
a wall book. as well in comic book stores.
Became a what? I'm sorry.
Because a wall book, a book that went up on the
Oh,
wall
right,
for
right, right.
like $10 as opposed to cover, and then the price started climbing because something epic had happened in that issue that was going to change comics for a while and stuff, and so that became a wall book. A few of our books, and the number one was definitely a wall book. The Death of Karen was a wall book, and The Death of Mysterio was a wall book. Although Mysterio was a character loaned to us, and Bob Harris and Upstairs Marvel knew what we were going to do, that he was going to kill himself at the end. That was okay because there'd been a couple different Mysterios.
Yeah.
So we were killing Quentin Beck, and they were like, it'll be somebody else wearing the suit and stuff.
Yeah, and also
So,
it's a super villain death, and you know they
Exactly.
probably figured they could
But-
wash it away somewhere down the road.
But do you remember, like, it was huge for us. Like, we pulled off a magic trick, like revealing that it was Mysterio.
Yep.
And the audience loved it. And then we had him kill himself. And he says, like, and because his whole point is like, my whole life is a joke and a lie and a copy. And he goes, and I even stole this from Craven. And then kills himself like Craven killed himself.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot all about that. Yeah, yeah. D- right, right.
Life went on at Marvel.
Yes. So I'm going to remind you of something. I don't know if you remember doing this, but every once in a while it strikes me. I'm like, I got to go looking for this thing because I might have it on my file somewhere. Maybe it's somewhere on the internet. But do you remember that we actually did a Daredevil a zero issue?
Yeah, I got it.
You have it? Okay. You got to send it to me. Maybe I can get it posted on Marvel. So for those of you who don't know, right around this time
Wizard.
also.
It was a wizard. A wizard did a Daredevil Zero for us.
No. I'm talking about a video comic. Remember this?
Oh,
There
yes.
you go. So there was you had written, and you did it Marvel style. You just wrote. It was a letter from Karen Page to Matt. And then Marvel
That's the
asked.
breakup. That's right. That's how we did the breakup. It was before the book.
Yes, and Marvel asked if I could draw to this, and they were experimenting with this sort of pseudo animation kind of thing with I guess it was, I don't know if it was Flash at the time, whatever it was. So I did this sort of rudimentary, simple animated story with Matt Murdock reading this letter from Karen Page, and it's the prequel to everything. And it's actually something that, because he was talking about her being gone, right? Missing her and seeing her hair on a hairbrush, the smell of her still in the sheets, her toothbrush, all this sort of stuff. It was really, really beautiful, right? An incredible love letter from Karen to Matt. And I have to dig this up somewhere. I know it's somewhere in my files.
I
just have
forgot
to find
about
it.
that.
Yeah,
You're
I knew
absolutely
I knew you would. Because also we brought some of that stuff back in because I was looking at some of these old pages, and do you remember the massive, like, hang on a second, I got overlapping pages here. Here we go. There was that scene. This is before Spider-Man, where Mysterio had finally gotten I think it was after Death of Mysterio, the whole thing, he got into Matt's head, that Matt realized that it's just done. Karen's gone. Everything's gone. What's left to fight for? And it was this moment where Matt was contemplating doing what Mysterio did to himself as well, which is also pretty dark. And I decided to do these sort of 16 panel pages to tell this story. And the reason for the 16 panels was because I wanted to create this sort of prison motif where Matt was feeling trapped, locked in his room, locked in his life with no escape. And this is sort of, I'm showing the page right now, Kev, where we sort of pan across the newspaper headline of Karen's demise, photos of Matt and Karen, her hairbrush, even her cigarette butts because she was smoking at the time. And then Matt sort of loads up the gun and puts it up to his temple. And then the next page, he starts flashing back on great moments with Karen and how in the end she saves him yet again in this scene. You remember writing those scenes and what you were sort of thinking about at the time?
I remember writing lots and lots of dialogue, so much so like there were many panels. Like I remember it was like 2 pages and 30 panels, like some ridiculous number where Joe was like, I literally to a page, and that's why it became the design it did, because Joe was like, I'm going to take your dialogue and I'm going to spread it out over this page. It was so cinematic and so beautiful.
Oh, thanks, man. It's funny because I love drawing the superhero stuff. It's always fun to draw the action. I love drawing people talking to each other more than, and especially if what they're saying is well written, well constructed. It's just I love doing that stuff. I get the biggest kick out of trying to construct those scenes and construct the acting of the characters and things like that. It's the one great thing about being a comic artist is the ability to be able to do all that stuff. I don't have the actor coming back to me and saying, I don't really think I would say that or do that. No, I don't think I'd sit in that all that's now. They kind of do what they want us, what we want them to do, and ultimately the fans decide whether that's the case, whether they should be doing that or not. But dude, I gotta tell you, it was such a magic time for me and Jimmy and Nancy and Kelly, and it born so many incredible friendships and so much stuff happened in our lives between that, in that time period. And then you went on to write other books for our distinguished competition, man. You got to do your Batman thing, your Green Arrow thing. I mean, that was a pretty heady time for you.
It was. I'm telling you, man. I said it the other day on the show. Like the amount of credibility that I was afforded in the comic book community following Daredevil, because not just from like, hey, you actually did a Marvel comic and stuff, but then Jim McLaughlin over at Wizard like hyped us up to the nth degree. Like would write articles about, did a full profile on the Guardian Devil line and books. Me and Jimmy and Joe sitting there and smiling and pictures and stuff like that. They would have a top 10 writers, top 10 artists column. We would always be right up there. And so I'm the person I am today. The guy that hosts Fat Man Beyond, the guy who, like, even though I've never made a comic book movie, they're like, what do you think about that comic book movie? Because of my comic book bona fides that came from Daredevil and that entire era. And, as much as I've had a couple different careers, like, and of course, most people know about the film one. That's the most recognizable. But like, then I had this amazing comic book career. Then I had like a podcasting career. Then I had this like TV career. And then I had a stage career. But the comic book career is so close to my heart because that's something so closely identified with the pre-Clerks version of myself. Like, I was into that stuff before I was into movies, before I thought about, I want to be a filmmaker and whatnot. And even though like I went down the filmmaking path and like my dreams came true, I immediately used that as a bridge to my other dreams, which were like, I want to write comic books. It'd be amazing to write comic books. And you guys gave me that opportunity, man. Like, I'd done the Clerks comic with Bob Schreck at Oni, but the Jay and Silent Bob one shot. But, I was not going to be granted access to superhero characters. I mean, I went to DC while I was working on the Superman Live script. And I remember popping my head into the editor of Green Arrow at that point. I think it was Darren Vincenzo. And I was like, hey, man, I know you don't know me, but if you ever want to put that book in the top 10, Green Arrow, I think I could do it.
Yeah.
And
nobody
did. Ever asked me. They didn't right away. Like, that years went by. But I did Daredevil. And when Daredevil was on the map, then suddenly I got a phone call going like, didn't you want to do Green Arrow at one point? So it gave me credibility enough to get a job across the street as well. But I love that period. I still have artwork all over my house. Jimmy and Joe pages, which they were really sweet enough. Do you remember? Since we were not, we were using not a hand letterer like Sean Conant, but who was our letterer? Starkings, Richard Starkings and
yes.
Comic Craft.
Yeah.
So you were sweet enough where I got a bunch of pages, and these pages were never going to have dialogue on them. And as the writer, of course, I was like, well, I wish my words were on the page. So Jimmy and Joe had Richard Starkings create all the word balloons that stuck like stickers on top
Yeah,
of the art.
that was actually Nancy that did it. Nancy took Richard's files.
Nancy did it?
Yeah, because that's just doing old school paste up and mechanical stuff like they would do in Archie. So she put all this together, I only have a few pages from that run.
Every day I see those pages. I walk past them. Every day you go through my head at one point or another, man. Every day that period of my life goes through my head. Even right now, like, look, the whole world is making superhero stuff. And there's, a school of thought that's like, hey, shouldn't you be doing that? Because you've been talking about this stuff for like 25 years. But, the simple truth is, like, I don't think I'm talented enough to do that stuff. I love to watch those movies, but I don't want to make those movies. But even though I'll never make one of those movies and I don't get to play in that sandbox, I played with those characters before they got famous. You know what I'm saying? Like, part of my dopey mythology or whatever is like, oh, he was doing stuff before the curve or whatever. Right. And so even though, I'll never make an Avengers movie, I'll never make a Marvel movie or anything like that, we made this series where I played with all of those characters. Like, I knew them before they were cool, so to speak. So I love that. I think about that all the time, man. And thank you for that opportunity.
Oh, man. Listen. But by the way, you also, aside from Superman, you came very close to Green Hornet. We know this, right?
Yes. With you, I know. At one point, I was just like, I remember Robert had brought Frank into Sin City, and I was like, oh my God, if that's in play, I'm going to bring Joe in and do Green Hornet. And Joe drew storyboards.
Yeah, you got me all excited. You're like, I'm thinking about writing this, and then so I just did some storyboards based around the original introduction to, from the old TV show where the car flips open and stuff like that. And I sent these to you because you're like, let's co-direct this thing. And I'm like, all right, here's some storyboards. And then unfortunately the thing didn't work out. It's just the way of the world, right, in business.
Once again, so I did the same thing to them that I did to you, where I was like, I'm not good enough to do this. I know you guys think I can, but. And they let me go. They weren't like you guys. They didn't have Jimmy call up and be like, you piece of trash. They let me go. They were like, you know what? You're probably right. Walk away.
So I'm going to show you something. Hang on. I'm going to get it. Things may fall as I reach for this. So bear with me for 1 second. So, because we're talking about Guardian Devil, and I just realized that it's...
Is that the baby?
It's the baby. It's the creepy baby doll.
That's so... Oh, man.
This was, again, I had to use some, there's a lot of Guardian Devil where, Matt holding the doll is just holding the baby, is just me holding the doll, You can see there's like markings on it. And
this was a pre-baby Joe Quesada, so you didn't even have reference.
I didn't even have a child. So this was the model, and when you look at I looked back at some of those pages, and I'm like, boy, that's a lifeless looking child. It's because I was using this little prop here, and I keep it here because I keep meaning I'm like, what am I going to do with this? And I don't have the heart to throw out the Guardian
Secret
Devil
Stash,
baby.
bro. Send it to Jay and Silent Bob's Secret Stash. We'll put it in the case.
Yeah. All right, maybe. We'll see what happens. But there it is.
That's oh my God, stunt baby.
Yeah. So you know what? Let's take some fan questions, Kev. Because we're where are we on time? We're not too bad, but I'm always afraid that my camera's battery's going to die. I'm finally going to get a charger soon. So here we go. Let's see. Our first question, some JL Mass. And by the way, some of these questions we may have answered, so we may just move on from them. JL Mass. I've read Guardian Devil a lot. It feels to me you didn't know Maccabees was going to be Mysterio. Did you know from the start? So I think we've already answered this. No, we had no idea that it was going to be Mysterio. Ben Schaefer, Kevin, when working on both Daredevil and Green Arrow, what were the mandates from the editors not to knock at you or Joe at the time? I think you talked about some of them with Daredevil. Certainly, the big mandate was sell some books, right? And do no harm. Because not only that was the other thing. I don't know if people remember. They probably don't, but our stories didn't just have to go through the editor-in-chief. Chris Claremont was on staff at that time at Marvel as an editor. And Chris Claremont was charged with reading all our scripts and making sure that they adhered to sort of the Marvel rules of the universe and that they weren't blue or whatever it may be. So Chris read everything. But with respect to working, let's say on Green Arrow, were there any mandates, or were you given free reign at that point?
I'm trying to remember. There was no other than like sell books. Like, I mean, if you look at the Green Arrow run, there's some like Ollie gets into some very risque conversation
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
with Black Canary, more so than we got into. And
I mean, I remember
like you know,
the Mike Grell stuff was just mind blowing when I was reading.
Incredibly adult, way more adult than anything we did and stuff. But no, there was no real like constraints. They were not like, you can't use this character, you can't use that character. It was, again, sell books. This was a character that wasn't selling anymore, and so suddenly there was a spotlight on him. But that was it, you know. And of course, act responsibly. Like, you're not allowed to do gross things with the character or whatnot, and you don't want to as the writer or the artist, because your heart's in this, because you're like, I love these characters, and they're letting me play with them. I'm going to play responsibly.
Yeah, well, especially when you're in continuity. I mean, if you're doing like a an alternate universe kind of thing, well, you can go. Those rules I know change from time to time. Creator
continuity was something we were obsessed with on Daredevil. Like, we mattered in the universe. We weren't a standalone story.
It was so important because we wanted Marvel Knights to matter. We didn't want people to, if we were a failure, we didn't want people to just look at it as, this is blip in this one off. We really wanted those stories to matter. All right, let's see what we got here. This is from, sorry, I apologize. This is from a guy named Ethan Sachs. He's written some stuff for us. Ethan says, to which superhero that you've written or directed do you most relate to?
Oh, good. Let me see. What a great question. Who do I most relate to that I've written? I mean, I've written Batman, I've written Green Arrow, and they're both multi-millionaires or billionaires, so I don't identify with them. Honestly, of all the characters I've probably written in comics that I identify with the most, probably Foggy.
Really?
Like,
okay, I wouldn't expect that.
That would be my I'm not a heroic guy. That's why I love these stories. I love comic books, because I love stories about like people running from the worst thing in the world, and one person in a fun costume running right at it out of a sense of bravery and stuff. Right. So, I would like to say, like, Matt is tortured, man, and I've never been tortured. So I share Catholicism and Catholic roots with Matt, but like, I'm not nearly as pained as Matt always is. Matt's a little emo and stuff. So I think Foggy, I'm very much like, hey, things are going to work out. I think his sunny disposition is kind of who I identify with the most.
Right. Cool. Well, you put Foggy through hell in Guardian Devil.
Yeah. Remember, like, you had the wonderful flourish of, when this is all over, they've got to start, Nelson and Murdoch again. Mm-hmm. And so there we are in the destroyed, where his brownstone was destroyed, and he has the Nelson and Murdoch hands wide, arms held wide, man. Really beautiful moment in the denouement issue.
Yeah. Wasn't it? Again, I haven't reread it in years, but weren't they rebuilding based on an insurance policy that Karen had left behind or something like that, right?
Karen's insurance policy.
Now, here's a naivete of us, right? I think in the story, it's an insurance policy for $1 million, and Matt's able to rebuild a New York brownstone with $1 million. Not
in 1999 New York.
Still not gonna happen. Still not gonna happen. But you know what?
It's comics, man. A lot of the stuff doesn't happen. So
we'll drive by
if you got a Spider-Man, you could definitely build a building for $1 million.
Right. Let's see. Martin Irizarry, can we have a Quesada Smith Daredevil miniseries? If yes, please have a Ninjak-like person introduced in the series. Okay, so first of all, I'll start this way. We can't have a Ninjak-like character because Ninjak belongs to another company. However, if you like the character Ronin in Marvel Comics, here's a behind-the-scenes thing. At some point, I co-created the character of Ninjak over at Valiant, and at some point when Valiant was coming back or revamping or whatever, rebooting, they had asked me to do a redesign of Ninjak, which I did, and then never got paid for. They decided not to do it, whatever it may be. So I had this sort of Ninjak design, and that's where we kind of came up with the character of Ronin on the Marvel side, where I just said, you know what? this belongs to me. I'm editor in chief, and so I did some nips and tucks and changed it around a little bit. But that's sort of where Ronin was inspired. So if you dug that costume, it's kind of from the bloodline of Ninjak, but just it's doesn't belong to them; it belongs to Marvel. So, but
So weird that you're like, I co-created that character like years ago. Like most people would be like, I co-created that character, and then like I'm still living on that character. Like I co-created Jay and Silent Bob or whatever, and I'm still making Jay and Silent Bob stuff. Is it weird to leave behind a creation because you're at a place like when you go to Marvel, you left behind Event, you left behind Ninjak, you left behind Azrael, Batman, and stuff like that. Is it weird to have these creations that you don't get to play with?
for me, no, because when I was working at these companies, it was clearly work for hire, right? So to me, I don't want to be that creator who's just like, well, I created this particular character at a company, and now they've done different things that I didn't have in mind for the character, and they've changed the costume and all that. Nah, man, it's cool. You know what I mean? Like new creators, new generation, creators come in, new generation of readership. Stuff's got to change. I love that these characters just still exist and that they're still using them in places. But I knew full well that I did not own this stuff at all. So because I went in fully knowing what the job was, and I could have. Here's the thing: I could have said no. Like I said, no, I don't want to create that unless I get a piece. And then if they say yes, they say yes. If they say no, then it's really my decision. But I knew exactly what the rules of engagement were. So, but now more to the question, another Daredevil miniseries story, Kevin. I don't know, maybe, possibly somewhere down the road.
Look, I'll do it if I got the right guy. That's for sure. I ain't going into battle. Like, I mean, part of me is just like, never touch the character again. A miracle happened, and your name is attached to that miracle. So don't ruin that miracle by going like, let me tell you another Daredevil story. And they're like, that one's terrible.
Right.
And you've had way more experience now.
Yeah.
So I'd be hesitant like to head back. Like I respect Frank Miller even more for when he did his Daredevil run, left, and then came back to do Born Again, because is one thing to like have a run as great as he had, to then come back and do that story and be like, bam, like that's nuts. So I'd be hesitant just because who knows if I could ever do something as good again. But the reason it was good is because of you. So if I was doing it with you, then in a heartbeat, I head back to Hell's Kitchen. Yeah. I'd go to Hell's Kitchen with you any day.
I appreciate it, man. And so look, full disclosure. I mean, so first off, when we finished Guardian Devil, and then I did the David Mack run, which was also just a great story. And I'll have David on here to talk about that as well at some point. Echo, creating the character Echo. That was it. I was done. I figured, I said everything I've got to say with the character. I've worked on 2 great stories. I'm pushing my luck. And then, I had this idea for a story called Daredevil Father. And I went back and then I said, okay, I'm done. I'm totally done with Daredevil. And then, you and I have batted around a couple ideas. We've got, I don't know, we'll talk further, but it's not like we haven't mentioned it, but it's the kind of thing we just, it's got to be the right moment, the right story. And we have to have the time to do it, really, ultimately.
I'll tell you what the right moment is. As the comic book industry struggles to come back from this outbreak, they're going to need like event books to get butts back in seats in through the doors. Yep. So that could be a strong motivation there. Maybe not to do an entire series, but to do like a Daredevil one shot that makes people go like, oh, and gets
you're backing me into a corner here, Kev. You're backing me into a corner.
I'm saying I'm seeing a lot of people in this industry stuff. Maybe we should be 2 of them.
Yeah.
I mean, and think about it. We don't even have to do a color book, bro. You could literally just pencil it and print that, and it would be classy as hell. Yeah. Like a black and white book, man. Like
classy is not a word that's associated with me very often, Kevin. So I don't know about that.
Oh, no, man. Come on. And think about it. It could be like it's definitely a book that's like meant for to drive sales into the store. It could go, proceeds could go to charity and stuff, but it won't require taking the book all the way through every process. It doesn't have to be as expensive if it's just your black and whites. And maybe we get some guy to ink those black and whites, so it's like a reunion of sorts. I don't know. Is that possible?
We'll see. We'll see. You know, it's right now. I'm actually working on a little something that's taking up a lot of my time. So
Right.
I got to get that off my plate first because it's a promise I made, commitment I made, and I have to get that off my plate. And then when that's off my plate, sky's the limit. We'll see what happens, man. All right, let's see what else we got here. Luis Vives. Kevin, any thoughts on writing another comic book story? What character and group would you like to write? I think we've talked a little bit about that. But outside of Daredevil, any other character you'd like to come back to at some point, or just try for the first time?
I did last year. Mark Miller asked me to write a Hit Girl series.
That's right.
So I did Hit Girl Goes to Hollywood with my friend Pernille, who's a wonderful artist. And she drew in a kind of Disney-esque style, so the story was even more twisted. So that was fun. I wrote that like right after the heart attack. I was sitting around. I couldn't leave the house. So I was like, you know what? I'll write this. And that was fun. I've still got to finish Batman Bellicosity for DC, and I still have to finish Daredevil Target for Marvel one day. Those, if I ever do comic book projects, those are the ones I'd be looking at.
Cool. Let's see here. Don Edwards. How often did the story change after seeing the art? Hang on a second. Let's see. Thank you. Saying Daredevil Guardian was my best work, and it's Kevin's best story. I lost my collected edition years ago movie from the Army, but thanks for the you lost the collection after moving back home from the Army, but thanks for the time, and you guys are effing awesome. But the question was basically about how much did the story change, and hopefully, Don, you got that answer during the course of the stream today. So let's see, John Riscetti. Kevin, can you convince Joe to collaborate with you on a comedic and romantic graphic novel? Some place where I can push my cartooning style.
Yes, I got an idea based on an idea Joe had to do that. We could do a total book about that. Here, look. We're in real time. I will text you so that we're not playing mystery games, so you'll know what I'm talking about.
I think I know what you're talking about.
It was a brilliant idea, and it still is, but it deserves its own. Here, it's coming through now, Con.
Oh yes. That's true. That is something that would be fun to do. Yeah, I'm sorry for folks that are going, tell us. I can't. It's something that we actually developed.
That's a legit good idea.
Yeah. So that is, it's the kind of thing you could actually even run it as a backup story in the backup issues.
I would like to write that very much.
Cool.
That's like Joe had this great idea. We won't tell you what it is, but honestly, like if I write a Marvel comic, that's the next thing I'm going to write is Joe's very cool idea, and everyone would love it. That would be a buzz book, dude. Yeah. Because it's always been sitting right in front of them, and they've never seen it, and suddenly you put it out there, and people be like, "Oh!" And it really would play to my strengths, at least. I know that much, and it would definitely push your style.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see here. This is from Patrick Pendergrass. I understand Kevin did not write the traditional comic book way by the time he started writing Daredevil. And by the time he finished it, what noticeable changes did he notice in his writing to meet my needs? What did he carry back over to film in terms of understanding? And did I ever have to take it down a peg in terms of making it more for readers? I don't know if I took it down a peg, but Kevin, what did you take from the comic book experience to the movie experience? Was there anything that was applicable in that world?
My scripts got a bit more descriptive after writing comic book scripts because you spend so much time being descriptive in the pages of writing a comic book script that when I went back to writing a feature script, like I wound up being the little passages like, interior house day, and then the scene description started getting more involved because my comic book scripts have to be more involved because you got to communicate anything you want to see. Whereas the film scripts, I'm going to go in and direct those. So generally speaking, those passages, the descriptive passages of what was actually going on in the scene, were very minimal. Post comic book script writing, they got much more involved.
Cool. Let's see. We've got a few more. This is from SZ Vincent. It's two-parter. Hey man, is there ever going to be a Clerks animated series reboot? And also, out of your characters, who would you want to cross over or make a cameo in the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Number one, yes, I hope so. We're working that as we speak. So hopefully, maybe the Clerks cartoon could live again one day. We're prepping a Clerks 3, so it would make sense that would be a great time for the cartoon to come back or something like that. But yeah, fingers crossed, man. I love that cartoon. Let me say, and which character? Hands down, Silent Bob. Are you kidding me? Forget everyone else. Forget even Jay. I'll step on Jay's neck to be have Silent Bob in the Marvel universe.
All right, we got two more. Let's see here. Actually, maybe three more. This is from Stephen Miller. Joe and Kevin, any interest in doing a Punisher and Nick Fury team up, or maybe Wolverine in the mix? I'll leave that for you, Kev.
I'll be honest with you; those characters are far too macho for me. That requires an intellect to write those characters that I don't think I.
You need Garth Ennis, right? You need Garth Ennis.
Yeah, it takes like a warrior mindset, I think, and I don't have that. All those characters you talk about, Punisher, Wolverine, and who was the other one they referenced?
Nick Fury.
Like, those are real men, and I'm not a real man. Like, I can't write real men character. My guy's got to be soft and heartfelt.
Right. He's got to cry, man, when you least expect it.
Yeah,
like you do. I've seen you sob many times. Let's see. This one, I think this one's from me. Okay. Oh, hang on a second. Having a little trouble pulling this one. Let's see here. Okay, so I'll just say it out loud. This comes from Mauricio Farfan. What character would you love to redesign, Joe? Actually, Moon Knight. I'd love to redesign Moon Knight. I have an idea, but I'm not on Moon Knight, so who knows? But I love the idea of Moon. Oh, I just froze up. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I think my camera might have died, so let me switch over.
I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're still here. Let me switch over. Okay, there we go.
You're good.
Woo! All right, I got the fisheye. Perfect timing because we are on to our last question. This comes from Charlie's Devils at hashtag Save Daredevil. I love the Save Daredevil folk. They are so passionate about the show. And hang on, Kevin.
These are the folks that want the show to come back.
Yeah.
I love that show. Look, this is a pop that was signed by Charlie Cox. He gave it to me on my birthday, a Daredevil pop of him. That show was so wonderful, and I know you worked on it. Like, because I remember watching that show and being like, my Lord, that is Joe's image. Like the last image I think of season 1 is him jumping off the roof, and it looks like your drawing from issue 1.
I think the most thrilling image to me, and I had a question about it, and I don't know where it went, so I apologize to the person that asked it, was they wanted to know how you and I felt in season 3 when there is the church scene. Again, I don't want to spoil it because I know some people haven't watched the show yet, which you should be watching the show. But in season 3, there is that moment where Karen is holding Matt in a church, and it was the direct opposite of the scene that we created in Guardian Devil. I know when I saw that, I was just like, oh God, thank you, Eric Olson, the showrunner. Eric was such a huge fan of our run, and just a huge fan of Daredevil to begin with, and I think his season was magnificent. But when you saw it, what did you think? Because I would see it in dailies, right? But you saw it watching Netflix for the first time.
I was prepared. I interviewed Eric at I think it was New York Comic Con for IMDb, And so
Oh,
I
and I
was doing
apologize. By the way, I
it was
apologize. That was the question that Charlie's Devil was asking. Sorry, my bad. So yeah, he's
was
asking
the
about it. Yeah.
so I interviewed like the cast and creators. Maybe it was on the boat. I forget IMD boat, but like I interviewed Eric, and Eric gave me a heads up. He was just like, as a guy who was involved with Guardian Devil,
Mm.
trust me, it's in a church. And I was like, oh, so when I watched the season 3 and I saw it, I was like, and that meant the world because I loved watching season 1 and season 2 and watching them reference classic Daredevil storylines and elements that I knew very, very well.
Yeah.
Never thinking ours would ever be part of that legacy because our tale is very specific, involves Mysterio and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And yet they found a way to give it a shout out, and that was magical. I felt like a real Marvel guy.
We made it. We made the big time.
Yeah, we made it.
Well, Kev, listen, man. Any last words to the fans out there who joined us and watching the show? Anything from you before we sign off?
Yeah, man. Like if you're a comic book reader and you like me, as I once did, dreamed of working on these characters, of handling these characters, putting your touch on them. It's a great dream to harbor. It worked out for me. The best way to get at that dream is start leaning into whatever it is that you feel would allow you in. Are you a writer? Are you an artist? Get fantastic. Work constantly. Write for yourself. Don't just create if somebody's giving you a paycheck or giving you a job. Create at all times. Be sharpened and ready for like the moment that somebody goes, all right, what can you do? Passion can gravitate you toward the things that you want to do. Like I understand true talent puts people at the top of the list. If you're like Joe and you could draw like an angel, of course, man, there's always going to be a place for you. But what if you can't draw like Joe? What if you've got a style that isn't quite as easy to look at, or maybe it's distinctive or whatever? Doesn't mean you're out of the game. Doesn't mean that like just because we can't all draw like Joe doesn't mean we can't draw. Drawing's fun. Just because I can't write as good as Frank Miller doesn't mean that I don't get to write a comic book. Thank the Lord, Joe and Jimmy dragged me over that line instead of me talking myself out of it because, we're filled with wonderful ideas all throughout our lives and aspirations of like, I'd like to do this. I'd like to do this. But then there's always a secondary voice where you knock yourself off your own pedestal where you're like, you can't do that. Why do you think you could do that? You don't think, why you? Other people are talented. They could do it, not you. All you have to do is kind of not listen to that second voice. Maybe listen to it, but then acknowledge it and move on. Just because you're not the best at something in the world doesn't mean you don't get shot. Like we can't all be Wayne Gretzky, but like playing hockey's fun. Am I right? So if you love these characters, man, even if you're not getting paid to write these characters, write about these characters. Nobody can stop you from writing fan fiction. Nobody can stop you from doing creative things on your own time. Make sure while you do that, you also build your own ship. Joe is sitting here at top dog at Marvel, but at one point he got to this place because he built his own company with his own characters, and turned Ash into something and turned Event Comics into something enough for Marvel to notice him and be like, why don't you come over here and do that? So even if you can't get in the front door, you can always find another way in, man. There's a window, there's a side door. If you build your own operation and people see it and they're impressed by it, maybe they come to invite you into their playhouse. And maybe by that point, you're having too good a time with your creation. You don't even want to go over there and stuff. But if you love this stuff more than just as a reader, and I'm not saying everybody who reads this stuff necessarily wants to create it, just like me with the comic book movies, just Marvel movies. I love watching them. And even though I'm a filmmaker, I don't want to make those. So there are people, it's okay to read this stuff and not think about wanting to do it. But for the few of you out there who read it and be like, I want to be that person. I think I could tell a story like that. I'm here to tell you, you absolutely can tell a story like that. Lean into that in life. 2 paths in the world: creation, destruction. Always take the creation path.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. That's awesome. And, like I said, this is what makes you such a great advocate for comics. You're always talking about creation. You're always talking about the positive of what comics do, and for that, man, I think we all love you. I love you for different reasons, also, going way back. So I'm gonna say bye to you, man, because we've run very long, and if you've stuck with us, thank you so much, Kevin. As always, we'll catch up again. We'll bring you on, and hopefully, when this thing is over.
Anytime you need me, I will always be there, Joe.
Appreciate that.
If anybody's looking for me, find me at thatkevinsmithclub.com.
There you go, man. Cool. And again, love to the family. Okay, and stay safe.
And vice versa.
And when we see each other, we will do the sort of the distance hug. And be good, brother. I'll talk to you later, man.
Toss the baby at each other as a
Oh
greeting.
yeah, cool. Yeah. Well, but we have to wear gloves. We need to wear gloves. We can't just toss the baby. We're talking about baby doll. For those hang on. In case you're shooting late, we're not talking about a real baby. We're talking about tossing this thing. Okay. Kevin, thanks again, man. I'll talk to you soon.
See you later, man.
All right, be good.
Bye,
brother. Hey, gang. Thanks again for being a part of the show, and for keeping me distracted as well. And thanks again for Kevin. Love you, and I love you guys. Remember, wash your hands. Get close to your loved ones. Tell them you love them. And oh, that's right. We have a guest. I know I've said it before, but let me get his graphic up, man, because it's the thing to do. Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. My buddy Jimmy Palmiotti, co-conspirator in Marvel Knights, he is going to be on, and we'll be talking about not just Marvel Knights, but we're going to talk about the pre Marvel Knights days, like how we met and how everything developed that got us into the door at Marvel in the first place, if that interests you. But from a career standpoint, if you're looking to find ways to manage your career and get through the door, whether it's Marvel Comics or just the entertainment business in general, we did a lot of stuff together to sort of open up those doors for ourselves. So guys, thank you again, and as always, we will be continued next time. So I'll see you for episode 12 with Jimmy Palmiotti. Take care, gang.
We were kings of Brooklyn, baby.